Hello, I'm Liz, one of Derry's reference librarians, and welcome to another episode of Misinformation Busters. Once a week, we tackle a rumor or a false or misunderstood story, and we try to separate fact from fiction. This week, we're talking about one of the most irresponsible viral memes of the past 5 years, the Tide Pod Challenge. So, what's the story? In January of 2018, parents were alerted to a dangerous online trend for teens, the Tide Pod Challenge. Teens were putting Tide Pods in their mouths, posting videos of them cooking Tide Pods, and even putting them on pizza. And poison control centers were seeing an increase in, quote, intentional exposures. Some people saw this as just the newest dumb thing that teens are doing. Others saw this as a sign that this crop of teens was particularly dumb and made comments like, well, millennials eat Tide Pods. Google and Facebook removed challenge videos, and Procter & Gamble, the company that produces Tide Pods, had to release a statement telling people that Tide Pods are not to be ingested. This actually led to a pretty funny PSA with then Patriots tight end Rob Gronkowski saying Tide Pods are just for laundry. So, what are the facts? The Tide Pod Challenge is an interesting case and something I've wanted to cover for a while because it's an example of something that started as a joke, became real very quickly, and then became a joke again, all within about 2 to 3 months of each other. Snopes did a deep dive on this, and it turns out that eating Tide Pods has been the subject of online jokes and videos on sites like College Humor for as early as 2012, 2013. And these were prank videos of people just squeezing them until they burst or even commenting on the fact that looked like candy. Kind of meta humor, if you will. But it ramped into high gear in December of 2017 when it became a Twitter meme/joke, calling it a forbidden snack. New York Magazine covered it and documented tweets of people saying things like, Vincent Van Gogh used to eat Tide Pods because he wanted to feel happiness inside of him. But they also noted that this had a long history as a joke on the internet rather than a real thing. And less than a month later, this morphs into a panic. I mean, look at the transcript to the GMA segment on it. And why? Because teens started doing it, either as a dare or trying to be cool or trying to be funny, etc., etc. It went from being an online joke to a harmful trend among teens. And I do want to say that most teens were not eating the Tide Pods. They were putting it between their teeth and biting down, which still dumb because even though those pods are in little plastic casings, they do dissolve with saliva. And if you bite down, that powder can't get in your mouth and you're going to have a bad time. Also, around the same time, there were more humorous videos and pictures of people putting Tide Pod on frozen pizza or cooking them on the stove. And while early reports noted the history of the Tide Pod joke, the joke and the teens doing risky things got conflated into one thing. And then eventually, almost the next month, it just became a joke again with bakeries making Tide Pod donuts. So, here's the real question. How many teens actually ingested Tide Pods? I still haven't found an exact number, but NPR reported on January 30th that poison control centers received 134 reports of intentional exposures in that month, but no specifications of age. A Time magazine piece published on January 16th said that according to the American Association of Poison Control Centers, there were 39 reports of teens, quote, misusing Tide Pods within the first 15 days of 2018. The spokesman, Edward Walrod, said that there were only 39 cases total in 2016 and 53 total in 2017. So there is a rise, but nowhere near an epidemic, especially considering it fizzled out so quickly, probably when teens realized this could send them to the hospital. Seriously, kids, listen to Gronk. Also, fun-ish fact, prior to the Tide Pod Challenge, the biggest accidental exposure besides children under 5 were the elderly, usually elderly with dementia. And in 2017, Poison Control Centers reported 167 cases of adults over 60 being exposed. The aftermath of this was mainly just people on social media calling teens stupid, suggesting humanity was doomed, and calling millennials, quote, the Tide Pod generation. Which, millennials were born in the 1980s, so we are in our 30s, almost 40. Please stop referring to everyone under the age of 45 as a millennial. Anyway, as reckless as the challenge was, the problem isn't really teens these days. The problem is, as Dr. Claire McCarthy put it on the Harvard Health blog, that teens are learning and mentally growing quickly, and they usually take risks, regardless of whether or not it seems like a good idea. She says, quote, unfortunately, teens don't limit their risk taking to leaving home or falling in love. They take dumb risks, the same kind that we took as teenagers. We took them because we thought we were invincible and because our friends were watching and egging us on. That's another part of teen reality. What their peers think matters a lot. And then she goes on to talk about how social media can be an intense form of peer pressure. So teens try these stunts to seem cool, then they get sick or see their friends get sick, and they learn not to do this. So while this is definitely tied to a modern invention like social media, at its core, it seems to be an age-old teen risk-taking, and thankfully, or hopefully, quick learning. Thank you for watching, and as always, check sources for the comments, and feel free to research using our EBSCO databases, available through the library's website, or, when in doubt, ask a librarian, and I'll see you next week.